Laker fans, stand up. You finally have a podcast that represents you. Make sure you check out Lakers Reign podcast with yours truly, Nick Hamilton. Every week, we have the latest news on the purple and gold and what's going down on the court.
This is Mitchell.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Nate Boyer.
This is Hilliard Guest.
This is Nathan
This
East.
is Rob Bell.
This is J.R. Robinson.
This is Dan Stone.
This is Dr. Bob Greenberg.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, I'm Mark Valley.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey guys, I'm Skip Rogers, and I'm the CEO of the Interviews and Interrogations Institute, which is a training company that trains cops how to do interviews and interrogations, and we're on the Break It Down show.
And now, the Break It Down show with John Leon Guerrero, Mark Valley, and Pete A. Turner.
Yes, we are.
Yeehaw.
Doing it from Mark's house.
Let's go. From Mark's house in Los Angeles, California, from Eagle Rock to, where are you, Skip? Fulton?
I'm up in a little place called Browns Valley, California.
Browns Valley.
Up in Yuba County.
We got Rudy in the background.
Is the dog drinking some water? It's hot up here. It's like 100. It's about 100 or so today.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It's hot today. St. Anne's.
So
we're probably in the high 80s up here.
So just as an introduction, from what I know of Skip, aka Charles Rogers, you're former, well, you're in the Army before, but you're also a former detective from Fulton County. You're a consultant, you're a trainer. You've been mentioned on networks, and you've worked for a lot of different law enforcement agencies. You're a specialist with interviews and interrogations, which would suggest your website, interviewsandinterrogation.com. Get confessions on Facebook. We're really glad to have you here, and thanks for tuning in.
Well, it's a pleasure being with you guys.
It's always nice when somebody accepts your Skype friend request.
Yeah.
A complete stranger.
Yeah.
You think,
yeah,
this is great.
This Skype stuff's all new to me, guys. Well, I come from a low-tech era.
That's all right. I mean, you do a low-tech thing. I mean, being able to sit across from somebody and start to understand who and what they are. That's, everybody thinks they read body language well. You know, like I encounter people all the time, and anybody, all right, I'm going to say this, Skip, is to one guy or another who does this kind of work. I know that I understand certain things about body language, but I get that shit wrong all the time. It's a puzzle, one that's hard to put together.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's easy to make mistakes if you focus on nothing but the body language. You know, to be a good interrogator or interviewer, and when we use those terms, let's use them synonymously.
Sure.
Interviewer, interrogator. I think it's just as important to listen to what people are saying and how they're saying it in combination with what their body cues are doing. I think then you get a more accurate picture of what that person is processing at that moment.
So would you say that people specifically have their own unique tells? I mean, like a poker player would pick up or something like that? Like maybe one person, you notice him saying, yeah, I'm from Los Angeles, and he was scratching his face. You're thinking, well, I'm just going to keep an eye on that one because he is from Los Angeles.
That could be totally true, and his face just might have been itching.
Right.
At that particular moment. So, one of the things that we teach our students in our classes is that, no two people are going to display the same types of behaviors in an interview or an interrogation. What we look for is what I call clusters of behavior. It has to do with the timing of their responses, the strength of their responses, the words that they choose, and then what are the body language or the tics that we're seeing that in association with that cluster of gestures. The minute an interviewer or interrogator, at least in my world or my experience, the minute we begin to focus on one thing, we lose sight of all these other things that could be telling us an even greater picture. So we take more of a holistic approach. We look at everything from top to bottom. Upper body, lower body. That's kind of what we're paying attention to.
Pete also has some experience in counterintelligence, like you just mentioned, with interrogating and doing interviews. How is it different on, say, the military side if you're talking to someone interrogating them, if you are on the law enforcement side?
Well, if I could just share with you the law enforcement side of it, I think one of the big differences from our perspective is that, at least in the military interviews and interrogations, you have these people detained. They don't have the rights that American citizens might have. And you have the opportunity to go in and talk and leave and come back and talk some more and leave and go back and talk some more, except over an extended period of time. Like in the Saddam Hussein interrogation, that was a 6-month process. Whereas in law enforcement here in the States, we may have one shot at this person, and that's it. Because all they got to do is say, I want a lawyer, and we're done. we can't come back and talk to them again, like in the military setting. Pete, would you agree with that? Or
it's funny. I was going to kind of go from the opposite into the same thing, but I feel like we're a lot more regulated in what we're allowed to do because we've made a lot of bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what people will call good cop, bad cop. You can't just walk in and do good cop, bad cop. You have to present a plan to somebody higher, and that person is working for somebody higher than that. And so the tactical ability to do what you need to do is severely limited, and it means your career when you screw it up. So You're right. We have that person locked down and held tight, but it's very challenging to do the dance. You know, just even to be allowed into an interrogation room, you have to have a warrant officer sign off saying, yeah, this person's approved to go in. And that person's not going to do that until they've interrogated you, you know? So,
yeah.
It's different for sure.
And you bring up an interesting point. And I think it's one of the problems that we're seeing in law enforcement here in the United States. And that is that there's a lack of planning on the most part in cases where guys they graduate from the academy, they go out and they do their field training, and they maybe get assigned to investigations. They may not get any formalized interview and interrogation training until they're maybe beyond halfway through their career. At least that's been my experience in the classroom. What they're getting in the academy is maybe 4 or 5 hours if they're lucky. Some states have begun to add interview and interrogation as one of the required components, but we've been lacking at it here in the U.S. for a long, long time. And because of that, what's happening is there's a trend right now where research is being conducted as a result of President Bush's Executive Order 13491, where they established a task force. It's called the HIG, the High Value Detainee Interrogation Group. And what the president wanted was for the task force to research all the best practices with interviews and interrogations. So they're coming out with some really good stuff. At the same time, one of the problems I have with some of the things that they're putting forth is that a lot of this laboratory study that they're doing is been done all with college students. That's a way different than dealing with a LA street thug or a drug dealer or a rapist or a murderer or a child molester. There's a little bit more anxiety or tension, if you will, getting that person to divulge what they've been doing.
One of the problems that I have to always fight personally is removing my ego from situations. What I think I know versus what the person knows. I know that I have to force myself to go, I don't know anything, and be wrong a whole lot so that I can get that person. And it's an ego up technique as well. Ego up, by the way, audience, is just a form of saying, Mark, you're so smart. You know how to make cookies the best. And you're like, I actually have the best cookie recipe ever. It's sort of a form of ego up.
Right.
So, I struggle with this because I'm a dude and I want to be right and I have an ego. Is this similar for you guys in your discipline?
Oh yeah. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems, that I've seen is egos get in the way all the time. Hey, you're going to tell me what I want to know and you're going to do it now. And that's not always the best way to go about getting information. If you think about it, in any criminal investigation or intelligence operation, we never know as much as the perpetrator knows. We never know as much as the witness knows. We never know as much as the victim knows. And so when you go into an interview or interrogation setting, it's difficult, not just the ego issue, but there's also this guilt bias that kind of gets in the way. We walk in because, we got your fingerprints, we got an eyewitness that saw you there, etc. We think that you're the guy based on the evidence. So we go in with this real heavy guilt bias. And I think it's important that investigators go in and be neutral because that guilt bias will affect how you ask questions. And one of the other big problems that we have in our industry is officers that ask just a barrage of leading questions.
Boy.
So much so that if you look at all the false confession problems across the country, and there's quite a few, one of the common denominators is the leading question problem. If I ask you enough questions with enough information in those questions and you get tired of being in the room with me, you could simply regurgitate the bits and pieces that you picked up with the leading questions in the form of a statement just to get out of the room. That's we've seen that happen on a number of occasions.
Do you have an example of one particular? I mean, you described to me before when we spoke really the difference between an interview and an interrogation, and how the interview complements the interrogation. I was wondering maybe you could kind of describe the difference between that, but also maybe is there a specific case or anecdote or one that you know of where a good interview paid off in interrogation?
Yeah, I think it's important that regardless of what this person's status is, be it victim, witness, or suspect, what we teach our cops is to always do your interviews first, because you glean so much more information about that person and what's going on in their life before we decide to do an interrogation. And so some of the benefits the difference between an interview and interrogation is an interview is a conversation, and it's like a dialogue. I can ask questions, you get to ask questions. I may say some things, you may say some things. I can ask for some clarification. You can ask for clarification. It's not challenging. We control it in the sense that I'm here to get information regarding this incident or this issue, and we try to keep the conversation along those lines. However, it's beneficial to let people kind of stray off of that sometimes, because they will tell you things that can be very insightful for you as the interrogator if you're going to do an interrogation. For instance, we had a case in Folsom many years ago where a guy who is a 2-striker in the state of California, so if he picks up another violent offense, he's looking at 25 to life, essentially. He's on felony probation for meth manufacturing. He got into his vehicle one night and left a bar, and he was observed leaving. One of our officers got in behind him to make a stop, and there wound up being a pursuit that ensued. And it terminated at this cul-de-sac, and he was able to make foot bail or run, basically. And we set up, we call that foot bail.
You got foot bail.
He got out of our perimeter, and so the next day he calls up and he wants to report his truck is stolen. I had a detective that was going to be working the case, and that detective calls me and says, "Hey, I got a court subpoena. Would you mind talking to this guy?" Well, he calls up and says, "Hey, I've only got 45 minutes. I got to get to a job site." He was a contractor, and he's a very popular contractor, as a matter of fact. And we get into the interview room, and I start asking him questions just about what he does for a living and so forth. And during the course of conversation, he tells me that he's named his business after his son. So that tells me that his son is important to him. He tells me that he's going through child custody issues with his wife. And he tells me that he's had his picture in a magazine there in Folsom. So that also tells me that his business image is important to him as well. And so later on, when I conduct the interrogation on him, I knew that his kids were important, that the reason why he probably ran from the police in the first place was because he didn't want to get arrested for a DUI. Had he got arrested for DUI, he's looking at potentially a third strike. He's looking at having his kids taken away from him, giving his wife the ammunition she would need to win a court case. And then the other thing is, how would that affect his business image? And so when I brought these things up to him in the form of a monologue, hey, it's understandable that you would not want to stop because you had all these things hanging in the balance. Anybody in your situation would probably be afraid to stop and have to deal with the aftermath. And I think it's important that, we tell the truth right here. And he ultimately did. He wound up telling me, yeah, I saw the cops. I knew that you guys were behind me. I was driving the truck. Yeah. And so we got what we needed. And he went on to do some other violations, and I think is now serving time up at Susanville State Prison.
Susanville. Sounds like a pleasant place, though. I'd like to go to Susanville Prison.
You actually have to leave California to get back into the state to get to Susanville. Isn't that right? Like, you have to drive into Nevada.
It's high desert.
Yeah.
It's called the High Desert Prison. Yeah. Anyway, that's an example. And then we had another case. This young man is working in an elderly care facility. His job, it's a minimum wage job, and he's putting residents to bed at night. One of his patients had some cash because this wasn't, this was assisted living. So he's tucking this guy in for bed, and our victim had like $140 in cash. Well, the next day the victim can't find his money. So they bring this kid in, and we're talking to him. And in talking to him, he tells us that he's got really strong morals. He says, I'm a Mormon. My wife and I just bought a new house up in the area. and I got 2 kids. What I was able to glean from that is that he's working a minimum wage job. Money's probably pretty tight, and probably the reason why he took the money was he wanted to do something for his family. It's not like he's taking the money to go up to Reno and go gambling. He's not that kind of guy. So when I threw that out to him, he took to that and basically told the truth as a result.
So what have you learned, just from your experience and your job? What's your view toward human nature? This is a broad question, but do you think people generally lie to get out of things, or do you think there's a stronger force to just come clean? And do you think people fall into categories, or what's your experience?
I think people have to make a decision at some point. Do I tell the truth and just deal with the consequences? Or here's the thing. If people can come in and lie to the cops and lie successfully, they can usually avoid the consequences that are associated with lying. Mm-hmm. Or with their, not with the lie, but with their behavior, their actions. Yeah. So if you think about it, we've been socialized. I imagine you were socialized as kids. Mom and dad told you to tell the truth. You go to school and the teachers tell you tell the truth. You go to church, your pastors, or your people there tell you, hey, tell the truth, that lying's a mortal sin, et cetera, et cetera. But then what happens if somebody gets involved in a criminal act? Well, let me back up. We find, when you were growing up, when you told a lie, when you did something wrong and you told a lie to your parents about it, was the punishment worse? Had you just told the truth, you probably would have been punished. But if you lied about it and got caught, was it going to be worse?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So, in a sense, we reward people for telling the truth. In other words, the punishment's not going to be as bad if you tell the truth. But what happens in a law enforcement setting is that if you come in and you tell me the truth about what you've done, you're not going to be rewarded. You're going to be punished. Mm-hmm. We're going to give you a ticket. We're going to arrest you. We're going to, you have to face criminal prosecution. I think a lot of times people don't think about that. And I try to, make our investigators, our officers aware of the fact that, look, telling the truth sometimes can be a difficult thing. Yeah, I think innately people would like to be able to tell the truth, but what prevents them from doing it is that they know that there's going to be some serious consequences for it. The other thing that I tell cops is that we have to understand how society perceives us when we're in that room on that one-to-one situation. I don't think that anybody would look at a police officer in a situation where you've done something bad as your friend. And the truth is that we're probably not. However, we need to understand that people see us out there as takers. And what do we take? We take freedom. We take your kids. We'll take your money. If it's illegal proceeds, we'll take your drugs, take your car. You're seen as takers. And all that really we have to give people is dignity and respect. And a lot of cops don't know how to do that.
How do you do that?
Well, it's part of the rapport building process. It's not being judgmental. It's coming across as a neutral professional fact gatherer. You have to come in there and display high confidence, but at the same time, you have to be able to display a degree of warmth and empathy. And I think probably the best thing is just to be able to listen. And sometimes cops aren't good listeners. They go in with this preconceived notion as to what they want, what they're after, and they don't take the time and the patience necessary to get somebody to feel comfortable about telling you about their secret.
I heard you say a couple of important things that I wanted to ask you about, professional to professional style. One of the things we talk a lot about is you have to establish rapport. So I want you to address that, because it's easy to say, build rapport, establish trust, but no shit. How do you do that? How do you test it? Because everybody thinks they've got rapport. And then from the outside, like, I bet if you watch your students as they work on rapport building, you're like, I can't, what are you doing? So I want you to talk about that. And also, I don't want to gloss over the importance of empathy and warmth and what those things do. My experience says that I can start with those tools. I don't have to start with being a dick and being aggressive and forcing. I can always go to that. But I have to have more tools in my bag than the hammer. And if the answer for this particular job is the beanbag that I have in my tool bag, I'm going to use the beanbag, not the hammer. So talk to me about rapport building and what that actually means, warmth and empathy.
Okay, so rapport building, the communication studies tell us that your communication will be 95% ineffective if you do not have rapport established with somebody. So then I got to thinking, okay, well, what is rapport? What's the mechanics of it? What is it? What's the mechanism if it's so important, and what does it cause? And doing more research on that, I found some interesting analogies. What rapport does once you establish it is it tears down that wall of resistance and opens up the opportunity for change to occur. And that means going from, I didn't do this, I don't know what you're talking about, to maybe, okay, what's in it for me if I tell you the truth, kind of thing. And that's kind of what we're after. We're not in there to browbeat people. Building rapport. Let me just share with you a little exercise that I put my students through in my class, and I think that might answer or demonstrate some of the things that we're talking about. On the second day of my class, this is after we've had some lengthy conversations about body gestures and all this kind of, I've shown video, I've given these guys breaks, we've laughed, we've had a good time. The classes are pretty interactive, by the way. About the middle of the morning on day 2, I started asking everybody, I said, well, hey, we've all got secrets, don't we? Because we talk about the importance of privacy, under what circumstances are you as a person willing to share some dark, deep secret that you've got? Are you willing to share it with one person? More likely than sharing it with 2 or 3 people. And yet we still have investigators bringing 2 or 3 detectives in the room with a suspect. Or we're talking to a rape victim, for example, and we got 3 or 4 investigators.
Yeah, guys in there.
And they're having to talk about some intimate, egregious thing that's happened to them. So the exercise goes something like this. I'll say, we've all got skeletons in our past, right? So we've all got a skeleton closet at home. Some of you have little tiny closets with just a few skeletons, and others have great big walk-in closets. And here's the task. In the back of our workbook, we've got some blank pages, and I'll have them all rip out the same page, blank page of paper. And I say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go in and look at your secrets, look at your skeletons, and I want you to select one that on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being would cause you an extreme amount of shame or embarrassment. 1, you really don't care. I want you to go in there and get as close to a 10 as you possibly can.
Pete's writing his down right now. Pete's,
and you're going to write.
Pete's furiously writing.
I need more pages. I need more pages.
Well, we don't want them. I tell them it doesn't have to be a violation of the California Penal Code or department policy, but it certainly needs to be something that would cause you shame or embarrassment if it became common knowledge in this class. And the room just goes cold. I mean, it's amazing that you can sense the anxiety.
Tumbleweed just rolls right across the middle. Yeah.
These are people who are not going to jail. They're not going to, there's no consequence for this activity.
Right.
And what they do is I convince them to write a secret down. And then I'll ask a show of hands who's got a 10. A couple of hands will go up, and I'll go and I'll grab, and I have to lay down some ground rules. First of all, number 1, I won't violate your trust. And number 2, nobody touches anybody else's secret in the room. All right. And so once they write their secret down, then I'll walk over and I'll grab one of the 10s. I'll hold my hand out, and they very tentatively will reach out and put it in my hand. And sometimes you can see they're white knuckling on the paper. Right. They're squeezing it hard, And I'll take that piece of paper and I'll hold it up, and I've asked them to fold it 4 times. Okay, so it sits about that big. It's about 3 inches by 3 inches square. And I'll start to unfold that paper and hold it up to the light. I don't unfold it all the way, but to see the look on the faces of the students, everybody's like, oh my God, what's he doing, And now people are wondering, what's he going to do with my secret? I'll fold that paper back up, and then I rip it up in little pieces, and I'll hand it back to the student and say something along the lines, you probably feel a little bit relieved right now, don't you?
You're forgiven, my son. Oh, yeah. You're forgiven, my son. Go in peace. 5 Hail Marys. Yeah.
And so I'll take these pieces of paper and I'll do different things with them just to demonstrate, number 1, how do we treat people's secrets when they tell us their secrets in the room? To give them an example or to help them understand what a subject might be going through when they're in that room with you and telling you their secret. So it puts the shoe on the other foot for a moment, kind of in a nano way. And I just tell them that experience that you just went through, put that on steroids. And that's what a suspect might be going through in an interrogation situation. And those things that you were thinking and you were feeling are the very obstacles that you have to be able to overcome as an interrogator. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's, I mean, just you describing it, I started to feel like some adrenaline rise. I started to feel some stress, like, my breathing became a little bit shallow. I don't have any secrets, by the way. But,
No, that's crap.
so, and then I was thinking, then the last part is like, there's sort of a hyper awareness that comes out where I'm just like paying an awful lot of attention to what you're doing and what you're saying. So you're not having a conversation with your average person. You're having somebody who's they're riddled up. I mean, they're ready to go. They're listening to you very carefully. They're being very careful about what they're saying as well.
Well, one of the things we teach our students is that, anxiety is our friend as an interrogator. When I first go in and we separate the two processes out. We always do interviewing first, and then if we're going to interrogate, we do that next. But during the interview process, we build a rapport, and I think I need to get back to that rapport building question that you asked, Pete. I don't know if we finished it or not with that example, but we need to get a person calmed down and feeling comfortable so that we can see kind of what they look like in their normal state. What's their timing, strength, word choice, and body language? Those 4 things I said that we look for.
Say those things again.
Timing,
strength, word choice, and body language. And give you an example of timing. One of the exercises I'll put my students through is I'll bring up a young-looking guy, make sure they got a wedding ring on, so I know they're married. And I start asking questions. What do you do? Who do you work for? How long have you been doing that? And how many guys are working on your shift? What did you do before you got in law enforcement? Tell us a little bit about that. Tell us a little bit about you got kids, and then I go into name your kids, all this kind of stuff. And then out of the blue, I hit him with, when was the last time you masturbated? And the look on their face, whereas their answers to questions up to that point have been, boom, boom, boom. I mean, the timing of this, the answers are coming out almost immediate, no hesitation. And then when I say, when was the last time you masturbated? They'll lean back. They get this weird look on their face. They turn away, and there's this long pause. They don't ever really answer the question. I don't give them a chance to. I'll say, okay, don't answer that question, kind of thing. And that's the timing issue that I'm trying to demonstrate to the class. And so they see it live in the classroom. So how would that equate to an interrogation? So I'm in here talking to a guy about a murder, and I may ask, tell me about your day that day. Tell me a little bit about your background, blah, blah, blah. And then I go, did you kill Bill? We might get that same kind of reaction.
So, no, but I masturbated this morning. I wouldn't hesitate a beat. Right. I just say it right there.
Just now in class.
So there's that's timing. And, when you see big changes in timing in conjunction with these other things timing, strength, word choice, and body language. Let me talk about strength.
Can I jump into something else before you go into this? Because this is really fascinating, and I think it's kind of cool to listen to all these things. But I think some of the classes and the instruction seminars that you offer, it's not only has applications for law enforcement. You mentioned as well that this, people who interview people for jobs quite a bit. This could benefit them as well, or someone who's going to invest in something, whether it's monetarily or money or property or something like that, or even dating or meeting someone for the first time. So I just wanted to temper that with how, with these things could actually have applications in those other areas as well.
Oh, absolutely. I go to the restaurant and I want to get some fish tacos, and I ask the waiter, I say, is the fish fresh? And the waiter goes, yeah. Okay, I'm having chicken. Okay. Cause, I mean, that's just a very small example, but this timing, strength, word choice, and body language, once you can establish, what we call a baseline, what does a person look and sound like when they're in their normal state? And then I want to start asking probing questions. Do I see shifts or changes in that type of behavior? That tells me that there's something that's creating that, I call it anxiety, if you will, in response or their thought processes around that question. Now, it may be that it's deception. Most of the time in my world it is, but it doesn't always have to be deception. It could be shame or embarrassment or something else that would create that internal dissonance, if you will. Their timing's off now. How they're answering and how they're choosing words. There's a lot going on. Is that responsive to your question there, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the other thing I wanted to, well, you went through the strength means, I think the
Oh, okay. That's what I was getting to. Strength.
Sure.
So you asked me, Skip, did you shoot that guy on the corner last night? And I go, no, I didn't. As compared to, no. Okay, so we're
It sounded like Bill Clinton. It sounded like Bill Clinton. That was a pretty good Bill Clinton impersonation.
Define street.
Define street. I don't really know what you're talking
what
about.
Your definition of is.
Define street for me.
Well, if you watch Bill Clinton in his
I did not.
who was the guy that they did an interview with him where he had to go under oath.
I did not have sex with that woman. Sexual relations.
And they're asked him questions. If Monica Lewinsky says that you touched her genitalia, would Monica be lying? And he goes, that's not my recollection. My recollection is, I'm going to refer to my former statement on that. So we get this big pause before he answers the question. It just requires a yes or no. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't do that. He does that on a number of questions. So that's an easy one. You can go on YouTube and find that one. But there's a case out of Auburn, California up here. Justine Vandershoot was the little girl's name. She was 16 years old.
Great name.
I can't remember the boyfriend's name, at the moment, but for some reason he decides he's going to go on a television interview, and he's asked by the interviewer, did you have anything to do with Justine's disappearance? And this is how he responded to the question. He says, no.
Oh boy.
Okay. So that's a really good example of strength. Okay. He later led investigators to her buried body. So the strength of his response wasn't what it should be. And so we'll see a change in the strength. Word choice is another one.
I had a question about strength though. I've never been a detective, but I played one on TV a few times. And we had an episode one time where someone was accused of something, and they said they had like a specialist there. And they said, well, if someone is accused of something they didn't commit, you're going to see that's when you're going to see anger in an interview or in an interrogation. That's when you're going to see the,
Well, that's not necessarily true. I mean, because we have different types of people out there.
Right.
We have what I call mamby-pamby wallflowery types. These are folks that are very timid.
Right here. That'd be me.
I'm sorry?
That'd be me. But go ahead. That'd be me, but go ahead. Yeah.
These folks may not be quick to be assertive with a law enforcement officer, some authority figure. And they may be very meek and very mild in their responses.
No, sir, I did not. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, exactly. As compared to, I did not. A normal person, and how are we defining normal? But normally, what we would see if somebody's being wrongfully accused is they tend to be quite adamant. And I've had experiences where they've even said, I don't care what your report says, you're wrong. They'll tell you that you're wrong. And those people, I go, whoa, that's what I would expect to hear and see from somebody who's innocent. Whereas guilty people have a tendency to they come out a little bit weak with their first denial, and they tend to get weaker. They go from, no, I didn't. No,
I didn't do this. I didn't do.
No, wasn't me, kind of thing. Whereas the innocent person, my experience has been that they have the tendency to get stronger. I didn't do it. No, it wasn't me. I'm telling you, I didn't do this. You're wrong.
For you criminals listening out there.
Right.
Do you ever have any criminals take your classes just for educational purposes?
Right.
No.
Can you imagine that?
Yeah, that'd be great.
And we get asked that question a lot.
Oh, you do?
Aren't we afraid about this stuff getting out there? You know what? When you're in the box, what we call the interrogation room, there's way more things that you're thinking about than tactics and techniques.
Yeah.
A lot of times, good crooks will come in and agree to talk to you, waive their rights and all that because they want to see what you know. All too often cops tell them way too much by the questions that they ask, those leading questions that I talked about earlier.
Right.
So, we try to get cops away from asking leading questions, ask more open-ended, neutral kind of questions. So tell me about your day that day, as compared to, were you driving the blue Ford? Well, now he knows I want to talk to him about a blue Ford, and he could, probably come up with some excuse for that. We've got a bunch of other tactics and techniques that we use, but I'm not giving away the whole show, if you will.
Sure. One of the things that I know also that as we build these things together, the perception that you can do counter interrogation to practices as a criminal. okay, maybe because they've been in the situation a lot, but if you haven't been and you commit some crime, you know, a flash of anger or whatever, you're not going to counter the interrogation. You know, something about what you do is going to betray you, whether it's going to be physical, very, very, very likely it's physical. And, you know, it may not be written on the wall, obvious, but I'm thinking of an Iraqi guy who clearly had done something, and he had locked his legs, like his ankles, the front of his ankles around the chair and held,
Anchoring.
Exactly. He anchored and he held on for dear life. And then his left hand was just absolutely crushing the table as he tried to withstand the barrage that we weren't even throwing at him. Like, as he locked in, we backed off and became softer and softer, and he continued to wait for this, you know, whatever it was coming.
When's it coming?
Exactly.
Kind of thing. Yeah.
And so, you know, we tried to see if we could get a different response, calm him back down and go again. It's very interesting when you watch someone respond and try to counter things. What kind of counter interrogation practices have you seen that were impressive from somebody?
I wanted to take a second out of the show and talk to you guys about our sponsor, WeFixYourScript.com. What I love about these guys is they're encouraging you, just like John, Mark, and I, to create something. If you think screenwriting is your thing, or if you've got a script that you're kind of stuck on, this is what you do. You don't got to buy anything. Just give these guys a call. Schedule a 15-minute consultation for free. It's WeFixYourScript.com. I highly encourage you guys to support these guys. Reach out to us. Reach out to them. Reach out to WeFixYourScript.com.
Well, I had a couple of cases over my career where, you know, I'm dealing with somebody who's narcissistic, very much self-centered. Those can be a bit more of a challenge. And here's the thing, Pete and Mark, that is that we don't get everybody to confess. There are going to be people out there that won't confess no matter how good you are. Right. That they just don't respond or react in the same way that the average person would. You know, the things that we are teaching cops are the things that work best with the average person, the average criminal, if you will, if there's such a thing. The psychopaths are going to be a little bit more difficult to deal with. They will confess. They take a little bit harder work or longer period of time sometimes. But here's the thing: when emotional people confess, the normal folks, they don't usually give you the full story. It's like peeling an onion. Well, I was there, but I didn't do anything. I was just a lookout. Come on, Bill. We know that you did. Okay, all I did was I held her down. Okay, come on. We know more than that. All right. I stuck my finger in, kind of thing. Whereas your narcissistic types, once they make that logical decision to give it up, they have a tendency to kind of surprise you, and they'll just blurt it out. Okay, this is what happened. And what they have a tendency to do is want to give their side of the story that paints them in the best light. Of course, yeah. And there's a tendency for them to do what's called victim blaming. And you'll hear them say, well, she was, or, you know, the company, this or that or the other. And what that indicates to the interrogator is that he's got to switch tactics. Instead of asking, what did you do? What did you do? It might be smarter to go, well, what did she do to you? Because he's already using that logic at that point. Does that make sense?
I was reading this book, I forget what it was called. Anyway, I forget who wrote it and I forget what it was called. But anyway, I read a book once. I read this book once, and I want to talk to you guys about it. It has nothing to do with what we're saying. But the guy, he was an experienced law enforcement, and he said, the one thing they asked him, what's the one thing in common with all criminals that you've come in contact with? If you had to kind of find one thing that was sort of a common denominator, and it was something similar to what you just said, he said that a lot of different types of people, but there's this general, they're people that count their injustices, which I think was you're saying victim blaming. You know, this you can talk to people and you can kind of tell like, oh, the goddamn landlord, or this came out on that.
And some people will do it. Some people will do it to a greater degree than others. Right. You know.
Would you agree with that statement? Though? That's a common thing.
Yeah, I think as a general statement, yeah, I would agree with that. To say it with the same with everybody, no, because there are no two people are going to be the same, because we just got folks from all walks of life. You know, if you think of the bell curve in statistics, you got like 73%, the big part of the bell represents the vast, you know, it could represent the population of the state of California. It could also represent the population of the United States. It could represent the planet population. But you have the outliers, that 13% on one side and 13 to 15% on the other side. On one side of the outliers are going to be those people that will never confess because they're just too smart. They're not going to do it. And that could include psychopaths and sociopaths and unemotional, narcissistic types. And then on the other end of the spectrum are those people that are going to be easily manipulated by law enforcement, that succumb to pressure and will admit the things that they didn't do. And they're out there. And I would like just for the audience to clarify something here, because there's a big problem, I think, in academia, this false confession term. There are some PhDs out there that think we don't care about getting to the truth. All we care about is getting to the confession. And nothing could be farther from the truth. All the cops I've worked with, we have to make very important law enforcement-based decisions. And in order to do that, we have to get information from people, actionable information, to make intelligent, legally defendable decisions that are going to affect people's lives. And so the confession is a culmination of truth-telling in the interview or the interrogation. What we're after is the truth, because we have to make those very important decisions. And so if somebody says, okay, I did it, that's not good enough, that's simply an admission. What we need are facts and details that only the suspect would know. And what Dr. Gregory DeClue, who's a colleague of mine, would tell you is he calls it the after admission narrative. And that's what we call the confession. That's when the suspect's going to provide you facts and details that would be known only by the suspect or those that are close to the investigation. I said earlier, no matter how much we think we know, we're never going to know as much as our suspect or victim or our witness. And what we try to do is get cops to make a list. There's two lists that they get going, that they put together before they go in as part of their planning and preparation for the interview and interrogation, much like what you had to do, Pete, when you had to get permission for your intelligence operations. Well, we encourage cops to do a very similar process, but there's no mandate that they do it. That's the problem. So
you're talking about the holdback list, and then
the holdback list. So we've got things that we know. These are facts and details that we absolutely know for certain. But then there's going to be a list of things that we know that we don't know. We don't know these things, but we know that we don't know it. For instance, we know that our victim was shot, most likely with a handgun, but that's an assumption in itself unless we have the ballistics. But we don't know where the gun's at. So that would be one of the pieces of information that we'd want our suspect to tell us. That's a fact that we know that we don't know. We know there was a shooting. We know there was a gun involved, but we don't know where the gun's at. Then the third list that we have are going to be the things that we didn't know that we didn't know. And our suspect tells us certain details or facts once the confession starts. Then these things we would want to go out then and corroborate through further investigation. Can we go out and validate or verify that information? So that third list of things comes after the interrogation. And if we conduct our interrogations in such a way where suspects are giving us known facts and details, and they're telling us about things that we know that we don't know, location of weapons and, other fruits of the crime, etc. If we can do that, then we've now begun to make the confession reliable in the eyes of the court. And that's one of the goals that I think gets lost in a lot of interrogations with cops, is that how do I make this confession reliable? How do I ask questions in such a way that the courts will look at it and go, this is good police work?
Let me push back a little bit on that and say then, how do we deal with that and watch that Brenden Dassey interrogation where a mentally challenged 16-year-old kid,
he talks about that.
Yeah, admits to murder, and now we don't know. And then when you see the video, I'm sure that you would, as a guy that's I'm ashamed for those cops, because why would you jeopardize everything, when you're doing something clearly that is outside of what's I would say is normal.
Well, that's the problem. Cops go to trainings if they're lucky. And then when they go back, there's no mandate that they employ that training in what they do. They're free. They have full autonomy. the other problem is that there's a lack of supervision involved in interview and interrogations. And a lot of places still aren't recording, and we should be. I mean, there's absolutely, in my opinion, no excuse not to be recording interviews and interrogations.
Some don't submit the entire recording, right? I mean, some places they're not required to submit the entire thing.
Yeah, like on the East Coast, for example, they'll have a guy in the box for 8 or 10 hours. He starts confessing. They bring in the videotape and just videotape the recording. I mean, the confession part. If I'm in the jury box, I'm asking myself, well, what was going on these other 7 or 8 hours?
To the end. Yeah.
I mean, you look at, in 2015, a big case broke out of Chicago. Police Commander John Burge, B-U-R-G-E, is up on charges apparently, or being investigated. He ran a torture ring from the late 70s to the late 90s where they would, actually burn suspects, mock executions, and this is a commander of the unit. So if the commander's involved in those kind of tactics, it stands to reason that everybody in the rank and file is, hey, it's okay.
Yeah. So I just want to jump back to your question. You're talking about Brenden, that kid, and To Catch a Murderer.
Yeah.
It seems like in that instance that was the equivalent of the guy just kind of swinging for the fence and going for the home run of the confession. But I mean, if you look at it, the objective of the interrogation is kind of twofold, right? Ideally you want a confession, but as the truth, but otherwise the other thing you want is evidence, right? You mean evidence that you can use to convict this person. Like, what are the sub-objectives of an interrogation or an interview? I mean, are you going to sort of piece by piece, line by line, or are you kind of keeping in mind, I want a confession out of this? I think it just seems like that guy swung out, he struck out swinging for the fence, and the poor kid's in jail.
Well, I have a little bit of analysis I can give you on that. My assessment of that interrogation was there was a sense of frustration with the investigators. They weren't making progress. There was only one piece of holdback information that they had, and that was the fact that the victim had been shot in the head. And so they started asking Brenden, okay, what'd you guys do to her head? And he's like, we cut her hair. No, Brenden, come on, what'd you do to her head? We punched her. And it was quite obvious from the way he was responding to the questions that maybe he really didn't know. And so the one detective, out of frustration, asks the leading question that provided the only piece of holdback information in the case. All right, I'm just going to ask the question. He says, who shot her? And all Brenden had to do was go, Steve did. And so now we don't know. We don't know for sure as a result of that tactic. And I think it's a lack of planning and preparation, not sticking to the plan when you have one, how to identify when you're making progress as an investigator or an interrogator. How do you move people along from, I didn't do it, to, hey, what's in it for me kind of thing?
Is it a mistake of arrogance as well? I mean, if you've got documentarians that have access to the case and you have this guy that's been in jail, wrongly convicted previously, why wouldn't you be just above board on everything? I don't know whether or not those guys did it or not, somebody killed that lady, but the way the police approached it, at least according to the documentary, it's really questionable about why not let an outside agency come in and do it? Why not be more open with it?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've been able to consult with a couple of law enforcement agencies in my career, and as a result of my consultation, they had some huge success in some of the investigations because they kind of get locked in and get tunnel vision, or they put the blinders on and they don't want to look at other things. I don't know why that is prevalent in our profession. I mean, if I was a surgeon, I hadn't done this particular procedure too many times, and I've got a patient who has some anomalies health-wise, I would want to consult with somebody, maybe not in my own medical group, but maybe somebody who's got a little bit more experience. It makes sense that we would do something like that because there's a lot hanging in the balance. Yeah. I don't know why we don't. You talked about false confessions there, and I'd like to address that in just a minute here, but you said something about being up front with. Are you talking about being up front with suspects?
Just
what did you mean by that?
The family has a right. we don't know for sure if Stephen and Brenden killed that lady. We just don't know anymore. You know, there's a guy in jail for it and everything else, and the community at large. When you've already put this guy in jail, there's a lot of questions about the legitimacy of that police force. And as a police chief, I would want to say, we have people documenting this thing. I want you guys to be upfront, be straightforward, and let's always err on the side of openness. We are being overly open with this, or overly fair, or we're bringing in outsiders to not make this thing about us. And I don't know what those things would be. I'm kind of making these things up, but
right.
When you have your own detective or your own officer discover the missing key after a week of searching the house, I would be like, as the chief, I'd lose my mind. Like, how in the world are you the guy finding this thing? Why are you in that house? You know, it brings into doubt everything.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, our credibility is always on the line, and when and we well know that there are police officers out there that will do things to try, thinking it's for the right reason, but they're going about things the wrong way, and I can't give you an explanation as to why they're doing that. I would never jeopardize my own ethics, and why they would do something like that is beyond me. No case is worth it to me to compromise my ethical values.
I have a question for you.
No bag of dope.
What if you're doing an investigation? I mean, you're doing an interrogation, and somebody comes up with one of these didn't know what we didn't know things. Like they tell you something that you might be like, oh, I'm going to have to go out and confirm this, right? And you go out. I mean, maybe eventually this suspect gives you a confession, but from this didn't know what we didn't know, you have a couple things that you were unable to corroborate. Like, so you've got a confession, but two, you have a couple instances where his credibility is being called into question. Is there do you necessarily have to report that to the defense, or you just kind of maybe let that slide as an anomaly?
Well, certainly we should be reporting that to the prosecutor, and then the prosecutor has to make a legal decision as to how they want to proceed with the case. The only thing that we as cops can do is the best job that we possibly can while we have that case in our lap. Once we arrest and we move that case forward to the prosecutor, it's up to them to decide, whether or not we're going to go this way or that way, or file or not file. Which brings up another problem, is that there's a lot of prosecutors out there don't know that much about interview and interrogation. They rely heavily on these investigators that bring them cases. We also have judges, for whatever reason, that, they watch people testify all day long, every day in the courtroom. And yet I think sometimes they could use a little training in being able to determine when somebody's being deceptive up on the stand. The thing about the false confessions, there's two points I want to bring up. False confessions and a trend that's going on in our profession. So I'll start out with the false confessions, and that is that since, according to a guy by the name of Brenden Garrett, he's a lawyer out of I believe it's Virginia, but he's done an article, he's written on this extensively, he studies it, and according to his research, since 1989 there have been no less than 349 post-conviction DNA exonerations from 37 states across the country as of January 2017, which is when I researched it. 20 of those exonerations were of people on death row, and 17 of those involved false confessions. Overall, 28% of those that were wrongfully convicted involved false confessions, and what that meant that there was 149 true perpetrators who were later identified. 92% of proven false confessions involved rape and murder. The actual perpetrators that went on to be convicted committed 147 additional violent crimes, which included 77 sexual assaults and 35 other murders. But here's the kicker.
I've already been kicked a lot.
Yeah, this is a big mistake.
Yeah.
Think about this, though. It's a lot of people. Since 1989, a total of 4,000, because I added this up, a total of 4,762 years have been served by people wrongfully convicted in the United States.
How much is that worth in American dollars?
Yeah. And
Well, I started looking at the civil awards, the ones I could locate, and I stopped at about 800 million.
Wow.
And let me say this too about that research. You're talking about what those organizations that do the DNA exonerations can handle in terms of bandwidth. You know, that's just what they're able to get to.
Exactly.
And so that number has got to be exponentially bigger.
Well, it's probably bigger. I don't know about exponentially. And I don't want to detract from the fact that there's a lot of really good police work that gets done in this country. And there's a lot of good interrogators and there's a lot of valid, bona fide confessions. I'm not sure if this data includes plea bargaining when the guy says, yeah, I did it to get a lesser included offense. In some studies, they do include that. I don't think that's a valid confession, so to speak, to say, okay, I'm going to take a deal. Then we're good. The attorneys now get to claim that as a false confession. The other point I'd like to kind of bring up for viewers, I don't think anybody's really aware of this, and that is that in 2003 there was a labor study that was done here in the state of California. At the time, and it was done by a guy by the name of Dave Schwim, who's now a PhD at Sac State. At the time, there were 78,000 cops in the state of California. And they looked at dates of birth and retirement ages. And what they were able to extrapolate from that data was that by 2005, 15% of the law enforcement officers in the state were going to be hitting retirement age. In 2008, that number jumped to 25%. In 2010, that number jumped to 45%, and that's when the study ended. It didn't go beyond that date. And I've seen this trend in the classroom, whereas when I first started teaching in 2003, I would ask for raise of hands, who's got 10 years or more in the business, and over half the class would raise their hands. Today, it's the exact opposite. If you got 5 years or less, that's 90% of the class participation. Wow. So what that means is that the institutional knowledge, these people who have come to learn how to interact with people out there successfully, et cetera, have gone on to greener pastures and have retired. And we have a huge influx of young policemen and women that perhaps don't have the same kind of life experience that either one of you or I have because, you know, we have that military background, et cetera. So we're seeing it's a big challenge, which opens up the opportunity for more and more mistakes to be made in the interrogation room. And that's why this kind of training is so important. And if we're not careful, we're going to give the courts and the legal system very ground to stand on to take interrogation away from us and have it kind of like what they're doing over in the UK. When you arrest somebody, you're going to talk to them, they have to have that lawyer present in the room, and that's it. So, you know, we only get one shot at them a lot of times, and that is, when I say shot, I mean an opportunity to talk to them. Yeah. So we've got to do the best that we can when we have that opportunity, and that's where training comes in.
They do have some training, like to make a D1 or so, like an LAPD, you have to have some kind of interrogation training, though, right?
Yeah, I'm teaching the LAPD detectives. Have been now going on like year 4, I think it is, my 4th year. Is it
mandatory for them to be a detective to take that training?
No, it's not mandatory.
Wow.
LAPD detectives probably. I have to be careful about how I say this. I don't think that they get as much training as they need. Investigations at the LAPD, in my view, is kind of like they're the underdog. The emphasis is placed more on patrol and tactics than on investigations. And their investigators there are just hungry for this kind of stuff. They do a really good job in spite of that, I think.
Yeah, let me just say this. We've had also another officer retired. His name is Fred Leland on the show a bunch of times, and he's talked about police use of force that ends up in death and that kind of thing. And the numbers are incredible on the great work that's being done. Tens of millions of patrols every year with just a micro fraction. I mean, if your number starts at 0.000, you're not talking about very many people. All tragedies, everything else. Same thing in the interrogation booth. I know that the interrogators I know that I've worked with are proud of the work that they do, and they put a lot of work into self-develop because that's the best way to do it, because you just can't get enough time. Look, those LA cops have to be on the street doing things. So how can they?
All they can do is run around, put Band-Aids on things.
Yes. No one's got time to go sit on a mountain and reflect and decide how to approach the next thing. They really have those judges, they get worn out by having to turn out case after case and are always behind. So there's a lot of mistakes made, but that's partly because there's a lot of work to do, and.
Well, the problem's systemic. It's systemic. I mean, it's not just law enforcement. It's the prosecutor's office. It's the public defender's office. It's, it's our judiciary. It's systemic.
Yeah. No,
anyway,
but the point is that you guys do great work, and we have a safe nation to live in, partly because when you need help, and I've been in nations where this isn't true. When you need help, you can call a police officer and they will come help you. And there's a whole lot of service and a whole lot of protecting that benefits us. And so there are problems, and there's clearly not enough training for people. Absolutely. But these guys are walking on a tightrope. You walk into interrogation room, like you said, you get one crack at the person. And we have to forgive a little bit of imperfection in that world, because it's extremely hard to walk in, and who knows what you were doing 20 minutes before. Maybe you're going through a divorce, maybe you had one of those days where you can't find your keys, your tire went flat, your wife still has 5 things for you to, and you're like, all right, and now I have to interrogate this potential murder person. So,
or you just came from a call where you had to deal with a dead baby.
There's 100 things like that, that are out there that go into that.
And it's cumulative.
Yeah, for sure. So I thank you guys and all your peers, what you guys do.
This is Mark Valley. I've got a new podcast called The Live Drop, where I visit the world of intelligence, espionage, surveillance, secrets, tradecraft. I'll talk with spies about their stories of international intrigue. Sometimes I'll even talk with the actors who played them as well. Check it out at markvalley.com. It's The Live Drop.
Well, we appreciate that. I think there's a push right now. A lot of emphasis gets put on what's done in a room, and to a certain degree there should be, but I think what our people in academia need to realize is that, and the world of lawyers, they try to treat what goes on in the interrogation room like it's in the courtroom. We get a different set of rules in the courtroom. I liken to the interrogation room no different than we're out on the street doing an investigation. I'm going to sell you drugs, you're going to sell me drugs, or I'm going to sell you sex, you're going to sell me sex. We're in the investigative stages, so we can misrepresent, we can be less than honest with suspects in the interrogation room if that activity gets us to the truth.
Like what if he'd said who stabbed her in the heart instead of who shot her in the head?
If he said that might have been different. He could have responded, we shot her, we didn't stab her. That would have been perfect. The cop
could have said that, right? He could have said a misleading question.
He could have said that. Yeah, he could have asked he could have done that. He could have misrepresented evidence. So it's like if you and I are on the street and I'm the cop and you're the bad guy and you go, oh man, are you a cop? Do I have to tell you that I'm the cop? It would be foolish for me to say, yeah, I'm a police officer. You're trying to sell me drugs if I'm undercover. You with me there?
That's the television myth that they have to say, right?
Oh, you got me.
Right?
I'm a cop.
Then she's covered. You're a cop? No?
I just think that people need to understand that when we're in the midst of the investigation and in the interrogation, that there will be times where officers will misrepresent evidence or misstate facts to see what kind of response we get from people. Not to be cruel or
it's a technique.
Underhanded.
Are there any strategies you have for being inauthentic? Exactly. Are there any specific strategies?
As long as we're upfront about it and we're open about it and people know that, then I don't see the big problem with it. Now that's not to say that we got to do it with everybody that we bring in.
So you're telling somebody a lie? Do you have any tricks that you do to make it convincing? If you're misrepresenting evidence or misstating facts to a suspect in an interview, are there any strategies you have to make it sound or look convincing? Just asking you, just as an actor, I'm just asking.
Yeah, no, you gotta play the part.
Right?
We wear many different hats as a police officer, and there'll be times when you have to act like you care. You have to act sincere when you're not. You're sitting across from somebody who's had sexual intercourse with a 2-year-old. I'd imagine that your inner self is probably having some pretty harsh feelings towards this individual. But I can't let that be projected in the room, because if it does, I'm probably going to shut down the communications with this guy. I don't want to come across as judgmental. So we got to stuff my own feelings, my own biases, my ego, and just be that neutral professional fact gatherer and get the truth from this person so that the system can do what the system does, and they may or may not prosecute.
So you could be, I mean, not just facts and evidence, you could be misrepresenting your own emotional response to things. You had a question, right?
I mean, it's like I have great disdain for certain segments of the criminal world, but if I came across that way whenever I ran into those folks, my success rate would not be what it was.
Jeez, what a complicated business.
So here's the best way to put it. It's the best way to put it. As an interrogator, when you go into the room, you have to become the person that person needs you to be for them for a brief period of time that you're interacting with them.
Yeah. That's the same thing in my world, Skip. I've got to be believable to the terrorists. I've talked to murderous sons of bitches too, people that laughed about killing kids. And I have to sit there and laugh with them and drink with them and everything else, because there's a bigger story to tell.
Yeah. So have you noticed, I mean, we're getting pretty close. We want to wrap up. A couple of things. I want to talk about what you have to offer with your courses and such. Maybe some last comments that you have. The other thing I wanted to ask was a difference, just that you brought that up, Pete, is a difference in cultural attitudes, towards, I mean, without doing any racial profiling or anything like that. I mean, are there cultural differences? There are different cultural attitudes toward the truth. I remember I had this one girl I was seeing from the Middle East, and she lied to me, and a friend was like, "No, man, you have to understand. It's a little different in some places than it is in America." But what are your experiences with that?
Well, there are certainly, like in the gypsy culture, for example, it's okay to lie. In fact, we're taught it's okay to lie as long as you don't lie to another gypsy.
Right.
You know? And then like you look at the caste system.
Is there a big gypsy population up there? I mean, there's a big gypsy population around.
I know there used to be.
In Stockton, I think there's a large.
That might be so, but I'm not where I'm at. I'm a little secluded where I'm at. So, then you have the cultural issues, like in some East Indian cultures where you're born into a segment of society, and if you're in that segment, the people you're in the low segment, then you have there's a hierarchy. For instance, and if you're exactly. And so if you're up here as a wealthy person, it's okay to lie to the police because they're low. They're like a garbage collector, kind of thing. So as part of our planning and preparation that we encourage investigators to engage in, that's stuff that you have to take into account in your planning and preparation before going into the room. Who am I talking to? Who am I dealing with? Are there cultural issues? Things like eye contact and proximity. All of those things can have cultural rules, and we got to be careful that we're not violating those, because you could turn somebody off in that process. And I think the more you know about a culture, the easier it is for you to develop rapport, certainly. So you were asking me about some of the things that I do, and I forget what the question was.
Let's talk about interviews and interrogation.com. And what services you offer, so we can make sure we let people know how to get a hold of you and how to become better at interviews.
Okay. Well, right now we've just moved our website to a new platform, interviews and interrogations.com, the interview and interrogation.com, and we offer law enforcement courses. We have a 3-day patrol or basic class that we offer, and then we have a 5-day 40-hour class that we offer. That's more for investigators. It's more advanced. A lot of hands-on practical application in a 5-day class. We've also I'm working with a guy by the name of Mike Weeks, and he's with a company called FrontlineMinds.org. And Mike, he is a performance specialist. He deals with people who are elite athletes, elite military operators, SWAT guys, SAS, And what he does is deals with, helps people deal with the PTSD and all that stuff. He's got some really phenomenal, methods that he can teach people to manage that kind of stuff before it sets in and has its negative effect over the long term.
Potential future guest.
Exactly.
I'd recommend you guys have him on. He's a really neat guy. He's a professional rock climber. Before he's no longer doing it professionally, but just an interesting fellow. Then he and I have been collaborating on putting our training up online. So we've probably got about 150 clips now put together. We're going to have a lot more coming, and we're going to be offering a license to purchase our online training, and you'll be able to, as an operator, for instance, or an interviewer and interrogator, let's say you're getting ready to go in and do an interview. What we've done is we've tried to make this learner focused. So if you've been to my training, you will learn about what's called a negative alternative question. And you're getting ready to go in the room. Let's say, oh, I can't remember what Skip said about the negative alternative question. And here's an example. Mark, it's not like you took that money to go to Reno and go gambling. You took the money so you could put food on the table for your family. I'm giving you two options there. One's bad, one's good. We'll give you the second one. The second one is the good one. So let's say you forgot what it was about the negative alternative. You could go to your smartphone, you can go to your laptop, plug into the online training and type in negative alternative question. Boom, it's going to take you to a short clip, 5 to 8 minutes long, talk about negative alternative question, give you some text at the bottom. So investigators will be able to go in there and find exactly what it is they need when they need it so that they can take that information in and go in the room and apply it. So those are the things that we offer right now on the website. If anybody's interested, I just did a session down in Data Point, California at the Monarch Beach Resort for some hedge fund people that deal with investors and people who want to borrow money and want to lend money. Did a brief presentation for them, things for them to consider when they're talking to potential clients to know whether or not somebody's trying to scam them or not. So it's nothing new. This stuff's been around for a long time. I like to think that maybe we do the interview and interrogation training a little bit better than maybe some of my competitors, but it's all important stuff. And I just want to say thank you guys for, having me on the show and giving me an opportunity to kind of clear up some misunderstandings about what goes on in the room.